This is the Directed Vision podcast. We're here with Chika Duru, who's the General Counsel of Advantia Health, previously the General Counsel of Trusted Health Plan, which was acquired by Blue Cross Blue Shield. And Chika has spent some time in big law as well. Chika, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Rick. Thank you both for having me. I'm honored to be the first guest on the Directed Vision podcast, and I look forward to our conversation.
Perfect. Thank you again. So let's jump into it. Can you tell us a little bit about, where you come from and your background and how you made your way to law?
Sure. I am one of 5 children. I'm Nigerian. I was born in Nigeria. My family emigrated to the U.S. when I was 11. And so my family's always been very academic focused. And so, I'll fast forward through sort of my youth in Houston, the majority of my adolescence. I think most people will say, when you ask them where they're from, they're asking where'd you go to high school? So I went to high school in Columbia, Missouri, though I don't claim Columbia, Missouri as home. But I would say law school for me was it wasn't something that I always grew up thinking I wanted to do. I think like a lot of kids, I always wanted, for some reason, I think because of movies, and I would watch movies and I would see the people who had the nice suits on were always on Wall Street, they're always in business. So I always thought that I would be, a banker in finance on Wall Street, get an MBA. But as I progressed in my academics, I did pretty well. I began to realize that as I got older and got more advanced in school, that I wasn't great at math and science. So this dream I had after seeing movies and fancy people in suits on Wall Street to be in finance, I realized that maybe it's not suited for me. And so law came about because I have an older brother who's a law professor currently at American University, Washington College of Law. And between he and my oldest brother, who's out in Los Angeles, they're both my oracles, I guess, so to speak, right? So in my life, when I need to, when I have an issue that I need to resolve, or when I need advice, those are the 2 men I go to, so the 2 people I go to, yeah.
So it definitely helped to have somebody, your brother,
yes,
a professor, help guide you through that process.
Yeah, so he's a professor now, but when I was in high school, he was in law school. And so I was just obviously very impressed by what he was doing. I was proud of him. And so we talked a bit about what law school was like. And I have always been good at reading and analysis. And frankly, I think if you talk to most lawyers, the practice of law is research and it's writing. Research, analysis, and writing. And so I've always been good at those things. And Jeremy, my brother, he was in law school at the time. He's great at those things. And so I thought to myself, okay, the oldest brother, the one in LA, he's a doctor. So again, going back to math and science, not my strong suit. So I was not ever going to be a successful physician. So I even though as a kid, all kids, when you ask them when they're little kids, what do you want to be? I want to be a doctor, a fireman, lawyer. And so I was one of those kids who had said, well, yeah, maybe I'll be a doctor. But then again, I began to realize that I just would not be great at that. So I didn't choose that path. Instead, Jeremy in law school, I liked what he was doing. It sounded interesting and sounded like something that I would be good at. And so that's sort of what led me to consider law school. And then when I moved to DC, I lived with him briefly for a few months with a good friend of mine when we moved here. And it was in his home that I began studying for the LSAT. So that was my introduction or entry into thinking about practicing law.
And you went to Howard University, right?
Howard Law, the real HU.
Yeah.
Make sure that we get that in this podcast. The real HU, yes.
That will not be edited out.
Thank
you. So you graduate. Mm-hmm. Then what? What was your plan?
Going into law school, part of me, the plan was to do civil rights law, right? Because it's something that's important to my family, something that's important to me. And it's always been important to me to help marginalized people, right? whatever demographic or subgroup you are, if you're marginalized, I empathize and sympathize with those groups. And so civil rights was what I envisioned going into law school. Or, of course, you watch TV, I object, like criminal law, right? I considered that as well going into law school. But then in law school, and I think this is the case, before I continue, I just want to say where I am today, I 100% give the credit for that to my family, my two brothers that I've discussed, and Howard University School of Law. Wow. It was a great, great institution, academically, socially. Some of my best friends today I met there, and so I have nothing but positive things to say about Howard University School of Law. But I will say that when I got there, and I don't know what was the driving factor, but a lot of the focus at Howard, and I think it's probably the case at most law schools, was on big law, right? Those are the coveted jobs. People want to be at a law firm. People want to be a summer associate and go work at a law firm. And so over those 3 years actually not even 3 years, over that first year at Howard, my focus shifted, right, from civil rights work, though it was always in the back of my mind, to, okay, let me start thinking about my career, and everyone around me was focused on, I wouldn't say obsessed with, but focused on big law. And so that became my focus. Like I wanted to, because Jeremy, my older brother, I'll take a step back, he had worked in big law as well after law school. And so again, because these two men are my sort of role models, thought to myself, okay, big law seems to be the focus at Howard University School of Law. My older brother went into big law, so let me consider and perhaps pursue it. So my focus changed from thinking about civil rights and criminal law to more the big law path. And so I began to, at Howard, just in interviewing, I interviewed with a variety of organizations, law firms, NGOs, nonprofits, but I'll be honest and say that my focus wasn't trying to secure a law firm position, and which I was thankfully able to do.
Excellent. And when you first joined that firm, what was that like? Was it something that you could jump right into, or was it something that you kind of it helped to hear from others that were there?
Well, so let me just say this, and this is law students maybe the environment has changed in 2022. I'm gonna date myself. I graduated from Howard Law in 2007, right? And so I was a summer associate after my first summer of 2005, and then in summer of 2006 I was a summer associate again, split between two firms. I worked for a firm in the DC office of a New York firm for 8 weeks, and then I worked in the headquarters of a Chicago firm in Chicago for 7 weeks. And so when you're a summer associate, at least at the time, in 2006, 2005, I mean, I just couldn't, I grew up with, not a lot. So I just couldn't fathom that these law firms are paying people like me, some associates, $2,600 a week. And, and we did work, we did research, we wrote memos, but really it was just a fun summer. Like, at the time it was like an arms race. All these firms were doing all they could to attract summer associates. And so every day it was a happy hour, or it was a cruise, or it was a baseball game, or it was a play, or it was a dinner. And so there was minimal work done, minimal like intense work. We worked. Every day we had to do something. Right, sure. But minimal intense work. And, going from no money, growing up with little, working full-time as a law student, still, my family didn't have a lot. And then all of a sudden, these people give me $2,600 a month or a week, right? That's what we're being paid, and it was crazy. I just couldn't believe it. And so I always tell people all the time, and I maintain that position, that except for being a professional athlete in your chosen sport, because that's playing a game for a living and people are paying you handsome. Except for that, and maybe covering sports, because you can tell I'm a sports fan. Being a summer associate has got to be the best job in the world. You're paid all this money. You do, again, minimal, intense work.
Right.
And every day there are a group of people charged with making sure you have fun. Every day they want to take you to lunch. They want to take you to the nicest restaurants in whatever city you're in. I don't know how many baseball games, how many booze cruises, all this stuff. And so that was my introduction to big law. Now, I will say I had the benefit of Jeremy, my brother. He had worked in big law, so he gave me some insight into what to expect. And so I wasn't completely fooled by the hilarity of being a summer associate and how much fun that was.
Because right after
like the real work began, right? And Daniel, you know lots of attorneys, and Rick, you as well. Big law it's challenging, it is intense, and I think a lot of that is a function of the billable hour requirement, right? So at the time when I was in big law, the expectation for a big firm like I was at was 2,000 hours a year. And you think 2,000 hours doesn't sound that bad compared to how many hours there are in a year, but it's hard to meet 2,000 hours and still not feel overwhelmed. So it was intense. Again, my experience was good. I maintained some of the relationships that I made in big law, but it was intense. So getting there, you immediately realize that now you're surrounded by a lot of smart people. You're given all the resources you could ever want, the food, everything's much like where we're sitting now, very nice environment. They take care of you in the sense that you're given the tools and the perks to do your job. But then, as the saying goes, with those who are given a lot is expected. So it was intense work, and in big law, and it may be the case in other practices, but in big law, there are peaks and valleys, right? You'll go 3 weeks where you bill 4 hours a day. Then you'll go 3 months where you bill 14 hours a day for 3 months. And so, and it's tough. I will say it was intense. And now that I'm in my role, I'm on the other side where I hire firms, right? So I have a sense of how long it should take to do the things I'm asking lawyers to do. But when you're young, you don't, when you're first year associate, second year associate, you want to impress both your peers and certainly the partners, those who make the decisions around promotions and bonuses and the like. And so and then part of what impresses them, quite honestly, is billing hours, right? And so but then you also want to bill hours in a way that your hours count, because what can happen is if you take too long to write a memo or research an issue, and the client, me now, but client back then, says, well, why did Chika send me this 2-page letter, but on this invoice it says it took him 7 hours? Right. Now, people don't always know that to produce that 2-page letter, there's a lot of background research that has to be done, but in the seat as a client, that's not your concern. What you know is that the work product was 2 pages, and you want me to pay $3,000 just for the sake of discussion. And so partners oftentimes are forced to write off associates' hours in the interest of pleasing the client. And so then you got to bill more hours. Right. So it's intense.
So it's a lot of the unspoken things that you don't really learn until you kind of leave the university. Chika, can you explain a little bit about, and we're going to switch gears a little bit, but
Sure.
reasons why you chose to be an attorney. You also talked about your family, which is very impressive. What are some underlying values and things you feel good about just practicing as an attorney, and where do you kind of want to see yourself kind of leave the table with, kind of at the end of the day, to hang your hat on?
I remember years ago when I was in law school. Actually, this is funny that you asked that question, because one of the former founders of my old company, Trusted Health Plan, I was acquired by Care First, as Daniel said, a brilliant attorney named Dennis Ellis out in Los Angeles. I remember as a summer associate, and I always give Dennis a hard time about this, because his firm at the time, Paul Hastings, came on to Howard's campus to do on-campus interviewing. And I interviewed with Dennis, and he may not remember this, but I remember he asked me at the time, he asked me a similar question, is like, what would you view as success, right? Assuming we give you some associate job and you come on full time, what would have to happen for you to view your career as a lawyer as a success? And I always thought that was an interesting question. And for me, you can go a lot of different ways with an answer to that question. It can be money, it can be number of cases I won, the number of deals I closed, whatever. But for me, what I had said to Dennis, and I think it impressed Dennis, his face looked impressed, but maybe after this I'll text him and ask him. What I said was, I think the respect of my peers, right? If other lawyers that I either am adversarial against or I work with, if my peers say, obviously there will be people who don't like it, but if my peers by and large say, that's a good lawyer, that's a bright guy, he's fun to work with, easy to work with, knowledgeable, if my peers say that about me, I would view that as having had a successful legal career. And so I think, 2007, 17, I'm 15 years into my practice now, and I think I am, I haven't achieved that completely. It's still a goal, but I do think the majority of lawyers that I've practiced, that have interacted with me over the years, would say he's bright, he's sharp, he's easy to work with, he's collegial. So that's, to me, is that would be my barometer for success, is having my peers say that guy is good.
Before you became a general counsel, what was that position?
So, yes, I was. So this is probably something else that maybe your audience will appreciate. So, typically for lawyers, especially in Washington, D.C., where the federal government's here, this is the seat of the federal government, most lawyers, the sort of path is, and not always in this order, right? But it's firm, government, in-house, right? Not everyone's career sort of follows that blueprint, but those are generally the three spaces that you're operating as a lawyer in any jurisdiction, but particularly in D.C. And so far in my life, you mentioned the big firm work that I did. So I was in big law for 3 years. I went back to school. My favorite practice of law is labor and employment law, which is, I'm glad that I got the LLM with a focus on labor and employment law and policy, also from the Washington College of Law, where my brother teaches now. But because it's helped me in my practice now, right? As you might imagine, as a GC, but some of the issues I deal with are employment law matters. Exactly. And so I left the firm, got the LLM, and then went and worked. So I wanted to get a job in labor and employment law, and this was in 2011, right after the 08-09 recession. So I was having a hard time finding those jobs. And then going back to how much I value and I'm grateful to Howard University, a good friend from Howard, who was actually my law journal student advisor, sort of student mentor. She was working at an agency within the U.S. Health and Human Services Department, our agency, and so she saw my resume. And though I was pursuing labor and employment positions, it's 2011. The recession is still sort of dragging out. Jobs are hard to find. Beggars couldn't be choosers. So I took this job in the government working as an attorney advisor at HHS. And I got the job in part because my Howard alum friend that I just referenced, she saw my resume and put it in front of the decision makers and they brought me in and interviewed me. So yes, before working at Trusted Health Plan as a GC, I began, and actually my job at HHS was my introduction to health law, right? So I worked at an agency that adjudicated Medicare and Medicaid disputes between payers and CMS and Medicare and Medicaid. And then, of course, not of course, but I also helped, this at the time when the government was trying to operationalize and write regulations to affect the Affordable Care Act. So I did a lot of work in that space. And so that introduced me to health law, which then ultimately led me to Trusted, and I've been a health lawyer since 2013. Yeah.
You touched on a really good point a second ago, which is that, employment law is really huge. Especially if you're going to be a general counsel, you have to have a background or an interest in doing that. I think what's really cool to hear about is the fact that a general counsel is basically steering the ship. You're dealing with a lot of different fires that come up, or just to be proactive and get ahead of those. What are some areas that you find to be a real challenge at times dealing with the business you're working with?
Well, so I mean, the title General Counsel, right? It alludes to what you are, right? Like, I'm not a patent lawyer, right? But in being an in-house counsel for a company, companies have intellectual property matters, right? Trademarks, copyrights, and so you have to be well versed in most areas of the law, right? And part of what I think is most challenging is everyone has their preferences, right? I prefer labor and employment sorts of matters. I just find the fact patterns more interesting, and I'm drawn to those sorts of matters. But you can't be an effective general counsel if you don't have a really, really robust understanding of most areas of the law. Like, you're never going to be an expert in everything, but to be a good general counsel, you have to have that, and not a surface level understanding, but like a deep, robust understanding of most areas of the law. And so for me, that's been, it hasn't been a challenge. It's been something that I realized early on, because when I began at Trusted, which, many of my former coworkers are some of my best friends today, and a great experience. But when I began there, it was a true to life startup. And I met Daniel when I was still at Trusted. It was a true to life startup in the sense that on my very first day of working at Trusted was the very first day that we turned the lights on, turned the phones on, and began doing business. So you might imagine, and this is a saying that one of our old CMO said to me, CMO, Chief Medical Officer. What he said to me years ago when I first joined, he's like, listen, we are flying this plane as we build it, or building this plane as we fly it. And so you might imagine where you are just trying to put together a company and keep it above water and ultimately grow it, every issue comes up, right? There were 1,000 fires every day, and that lasted 2 years. And so that was a challenge, was to go from the DC office of a big New York firm, everything's in place, it's a well-oiled machine, to go from that to the federal government, the largest employer in the city, again, well-oiled machine, to a true-to-life startup. And this was only a year and a half or so after working at HHS. So I was just still being introduced to the practice of health law. So then to go from that to being a general counsel of a health plan, a company that is a contractor with the government, and so we're a government contractor, so we're not even a commercial health plan, which is not as heavily regulated as a government payer. It was a lot. So when you say what did I find most challenging, is that
probably the regulatory.
It was the regulatory landscape. Even to this day, I'm blown away by it. So that was a challenge. It was just having to learn everything that you have to learn, that you need to know to be a successful health law attorney. Having to learn all of that and do it while running 100 miles an hour, trying to keep this company afloat and successful. That really was the most challenging period. Of course, over the years, I've learned it. I know it now. But those first 2 or 3 years at Trusted really tested my, not confidence, but really tested my ability to take in, retain, and digest a lot of information very quickly, and do it in a way that gives people confidence, right? Because nobody wants to ask a lawyer a question and have him stumble on his words and not know what he's saying. It doesn't inspire confidence. And so I always kept that in mind, and so I wanted to be able to counsel and advise and act with knowledge, with confidence, and with energy. And so that period was tough.
Chika, looking back at that experience, it seems like you were probably in a comfortable state.
Yeah.
What kind of triggered your emotions to make you want to take a risk? You know, was it a big risk, high reward type scenario? Did you have someone speak to you and then tell you that life is short? Let's jump on this now because you could miss the opportunity. What was behind all of that?
I'm going to be frank with you guys, and then I'm going to try not to offend anyone when I answer your question, Rith. For me, it was just, I had worked, as I said, at the firm in the private sector, and I went to the government, and people always say, like, with all due respect, and then they say something disrespectful. I'm not going to do that here. But I just remember, I loved my colleagues at the agency I worked at within HHS were great to me. They introduced me to health law. They counseled me. They mentored me. And there are a few people in particular, Judge Tobias and my friend who got me in there. They were great to me. But at some point I woke up and realized that I didn't want to spend, in the government, at least at the agency I was at some point I just woke up and realized that I did not want to spend a career climbing, GS 14 step 5, GS 14 step 7. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted the opportunity to climb faster. I wanted the opportunity to earn more money.
So there was never a fear in being the one in charge and having that pressure on them. I mean,
no. My decision to leave the public sector and go back into the private sector was really just that. I just wanted the opportunity to grow at a faster pace, versus having to navigate the GS scale. And then of course I felt like once you hit I think GS 15 step 12, you're capped. That's as far as you can go, unless you, I guess, I don't know all the ins and outs of government, but I think certainly once you get to GS 15 step 12 at that agency, that's where you are, unless you move into a different role at a different agency. And so I wanted the opportunity to grow faster. I wanted the opportunity to earn more money. And so this private sector, it really was, professionally, it's the biggest risk I've ever taken, right? Because consider, this is, again, as I said, it's a company that had no footprint, right? My first day was the company's first day ever. So I joined, and I remember at the time, both family and friends, people were, I mean, as one of my best friends would say, people were gobsmacked that I would leave the comfort of a federal government job with the benefits that come along with it, to go to a startup that had no performance history. Right. But I believed in the founders, Dennis and Tommy, Thomas Duncan, Dennis Ellis, who I referenced earlier. And again, I wanted to get back into the private sector, and they gave me points in the company, which also incentivized, which, by the way, to your listening audience, always, and whatever you do, if you have the opportunity to have points, in other words, have equity in the company you work for, truly give that some real consideration. It's not the case that you should always accept those offers that come along with equity, but you should always consider those, because it's been my experience that if you scrutinize these offers well and identify smart people, enterprising people, and you join companies where they give you equity in the company that you work for. One, your interests are aligned with the companies, and so you work hard. But it can really be, they can really be a windfall if everyone at the company works hard and you grow the company, which is what happened at Trusted. So for those of you considering job options, whether right out of law school or you've been practicing for a few years and you are approached with an opportunity to work for a company that gives you equity in that company, even if it means, which it often will mean, because that's how these companies can be competitive on the job market. They will offer you a salary, maybe it's a bit lower than you would otherwise garner in the job market, but they make up for that by giving you equity in the company.
So that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, what would be something that you would tell either your younger self or another coming out of law school or business school? You know, would there be any type of advice or any type of preparation?
You know, really just a few things, right? The first is obviously the work, right? The work will always speak for itself. And so for most law students, they're bright people, right? And when you're in law school, I mean, even at Howard Law, I hope I'm not just dreaming this, but I believe this happened at the time. You know, like at orientation, and law schools do this all the time. I think maybe even med schools do it. Like post-undergraduate programs will do this to their incoming students. You know, they say like, look to your left, look to your right. Like, one of these people won't be here next year. So it's a very like competitive and purposefully so. And so, like, beyond the work, like you just have to sit down and do the work, because the work is what's going to bring you attention. It's going to alert people to your presence in the room. Here's this girl, here's this guy that's done this well. And so people will pay attention when you've done well. But then the other advice I would give people is, going back to the look to your left and look to your right, is to have confidence, right? Like, to say that to law students, like I get it. I mean, I don't really get it. I don't know why graduate schools do that, say those things, but they can cause panic. I remember myself being a little bit panicked, but I also am grateful that I came from a family that always, not only like did they put intense pressure on me to succeed academically, but they simultaneously would always tell me how smart I am, tell me how good I am, compliment me, give me the confidence to know that I could compete in any room. And so what I would tell young law students is the work will speak for itself, and the work will get you in the room, but you have to be confident. Like,
you gotta believe you're gonna get there.
You gotta believe, because and never forget that whatever got you there, whatever got you to law school, as long as you add the ingredients, right? And the ingredients are put in that sweat equity. Like, sit down, read those cases, put together those outlines, study for those finals, put in the work. If you add ingredients to your regular acumen, like just what got you there, you will not fail. So my advice would be, work hard, but then remember that you're smart. Remember that you're bright enough to be there. I'll tell you, I'll give you guys, and sort of like what this story I'm going to tell is it will shed light on what I just said about confidence. When I was at my law firm as a first year associate, like you get called to a partner's office and they have X assignment. Now these partners have been practicing law, some of them 30, 35, some even 40 years. So they've seen everything. They've seen every case. They've probably seen most cases 100 times. And so they're giving you an assignment and they're literally rattling off case law. Daniel v. Rith. Like the holding was this, the reasoning was this. Here's the issue that a client's having. Here's what I need you to do. And, it's in this jurisdiction, in this county, in this state, or it's in this country, whatever it is. It's a stream of consciousness. They're just pouring facts at you, and they're injecting case names throughout. So when you're a young associate, that's overwhelming. And I remember having colleagues that would and not just colleagues, myself included, you would leave that room like, holy shit. Like, how am I going to, there's no way that I'm going to do this. But I had a good friend at the firm. Like, we were out somewhere one day, and he said to me, look, man, you're bright. Like, you're here at this firm because you're smart, because you did the work, and you can hold your own in the room. You're not here because the partners or I think that you know every case by heart and you can just recite the Code of Federal Regulations or the U.S. Code. You can just rattle those off. You're here because you're smart, which means that though you may not know something when asked in real time, like you may not know the answer, you're here because this firm believes that you can go and find the answer. And so what he said was, you got to fake it till you make it. When you're in that room with the partner, and then this again goes back to projecting confidence and inspiring confidence in the people that you work with. When that partner is rattling off all that he or she is saying to you and all that they expect of you, you got to stand there, chest out, shoulders up, head up, and project confidence. Now, when you leave, you can freak out. You go to your office, close the door, have that moment of panic, which all of us have had, but then you remember that you got there for a reason. And always remind yourself, so going back to the advice, remind yourself that what got you to law school, what got you to your job, whether it's firm or not, is your hard work and your acumen and the ability to go find an answer when you don't have it at your fingertips. So you go to your office, some people cry, others have a small little panic attack. Whatever it is, however you deal with that immediate sort of feeling of stress and feeling overwhelmed, do it. But then stand up, sit down at that desk, boot up the computer, and find the answer. So the advice, Daniel, is the work speaks for itself, but have confidence in your ability because you're there for a reason. And then, the last thing, and people say this to in every profession, not just the law, but like network. Yeah. I have friends that can work a room like they are magicians. I am not a magician. I'm also not on the low end of being able to network and as my brother would say, press the flesh, right? But I'm good at it. But it is critical to success. Your work alone, your confidence alone will not get you where you want to go. It'll get you a good enough job, but it won't get you where you want to go. My current CEO said something the other day that it made sense, but it also it was a powerful thing to hear. He said that he hasn't had to apply for a job in 20 years. Right, every job he's had over the last 20 years or so, his work and his network have secured him that job. And so my goal is to get to a place, my last couple of jobs, I don't know that I've applied for my last couple of jobs, but I want to get to a place where I know that my next job will come my way because of my hard work and my network. And I never have to go out and seek a job. Now I will, if there's a job out there that's not coming to me and I truly, truly want it, of course, then you have to go and get it. But the networking builds, it gives you a foundation that will always present opportunities. And I met Daniel And I always said he's a bright guy, and so networking and getting to know Daniel has been great because he's smart. We have similar interests, but you just never know how I may be able to help Daniel one day, or him me. And so the work speaks for itself. Have confidence and network, and I'll tell you guys at some point. I'll share a story about how I got my job at Trusted that began my path as an in-house attorney for healthcare company, and has led me to where I am since then. And it's my hard work and networking. But at some point today I'll share that story. I can share it now if you want me to, but unless you have another question.
No, please.
Okay, all right. So I'm at HHS. As I said, I'm thinking to myself, I need to go back into the private sector because I want to grow faster. I want to earn more money, and so on and so forth. And so I was close to, at the time, Howard University School of Law's career counselor at the law school. So I've been talking with her just about trying to pick her brain, what organizations are coming to the school to hire, to recruit, to give me a sense of maybe who I should be thinking about trying to apply for jobs with, getting her advice on how to transition, all this stuff. So I stayed in contact with her years after leaving. Again, I left in 2007. This is 2013. And I'm still in touch with her. And so ultimately, I got the job because Dennis Ellis, the gentleman I referenced earlier, who, again, is a brilliant attorney out in Los Angeles, he was a Howard Law alum. So he went to Howard Law as well. And so he called the law school and spoke to the career counselor and said, listen, I'm a co-founder of this company in Washington, D.C. I initially thought that I was going to be able to maintain my practice as a partner at Paul Hastings in L.A. and be the GC of this company. But I realize now it's going to be too much. So is there anyone you can think of who is sharp, can handle themselves in a boardroom context, and either has experience in or an interest in health law? And simply because I had spoken to Miss Conti the week before, I was on her brain. And so she said, actually I have a guy. He was here at the law school. He was on the Law Journal. He did well here. He worked at that firm. And he's now actually at HHS practicing health law. And so Dennis flew in from LA. Obviously they contacted me, flew in from LA. I met him at the DC office of Paul Hastings, interviewed with him, then interviewed with his co-founder, Thomas Duncan, and he got me the job. And so it was just my, taking that, being a human being, right? Like, she's a person that would email me, how are you doing? Taking the time to be a human being, respond, be kind, that's your friend, but also recognize that there can be benefits to staying in touch, to maintaining that connection, that network. And so that simple act of responding to an email, calling once a quarter, right? That's not a lot. To call once a quarter. It changed my life. That little act changed my life. And so I would just urge people going to try to tie all this together.
Yeah, and that's
the work. Yeah, go ahead.
Piece of networking right there. It's just you get a personal relationships and close friends and still call it networking. I think what people don't love about the idea of networking is just the image in their mind of a room of people that just want something from each other and nobody's willing to help each other, and that's what it is.
And and there are those rooms, and all of us have been in those rooms where you're literally just handing out business cards, right? How many of those people will ever reach out to you, or will you reach out to them? I think that's what, to your point, that's what people envision when they hear the word networking. And nobody, I don't care who you are, enjoys that, right? Because it doesn't seem often, not always, but often doesn't seem sincere and genuine. Right. And so people don't like the small talk and all of that, and so they shy away from networking. Well, I would challenge them to say, you you got to be in those rooms. It's uncomfortable. No one loves it, but it is in today's job market. It is a career-changing step that you must take.
And once you're in those rooms, you must care.
You must
about
care.
The conversation, even if you don't.
Even if you don't.
Trick yourself into caring about things.
That's right.
And then find things the commonalities. Right?
That's right.
And to keep those conversations going. And I think what definitely becomes a frustration for folks is okay, well, that was nice. Am I ever going to see this person again?
Exactly.
Following that up. And how
that's
can
right.
I get back in front of these people? How can I bring more value?
And I think a lot of people, again, I'm not the best networker in the world. I'm good. I'm not great. And I, like everyone else, I'm like, oh, God, another hour long in this room, handing out business cards. I don't know whether these people like me, care about what I'm saying. I sometimes don't like or care about what they're saying. But again, to your point, Daniel, you have to remember that if these aren't your friends, these are potential colleagues one day. These are people that can connect you to a colleague one day. And so you got to treat them with kindness, treat them with respect, treat them with interest. It may not be something you love, but try to force yourself to really think about what they're saying, express some interest in it, because you just never know who this person or how this person might be able to help you, or quite honestly, how you might be able to help them one day. Because most people say it all the time. Again, your grades and your work will get you a job. But to get the job, you're going to need your grades, that confidence I talked about, and your network. Because your network, they know people and they have a network, and it just expands. And that's what will get you not just a job, but the job that you want.
Your network is your network.
Yeah. There you go. Oh, is that a saying?
It is a real saying.
I'd never heard that, but it makes sense.
For a lot of our listeners on the line, I mean, things that you've done is nothing short of amazing. I mean, we're talking to Chika Duru here, right? So I met Chika about 4 years ago, and while you were at Trusted as well. And I remember days when you were wearing a suit and we were having a drink and you were stressed out of your mind, and you took a big risk. And that's why I asked that question. Is that I think that risk, that's everything, man. I think.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Rith, and I'm sorry to cut you off. That risk, at the time, even I was nervous about taking it, right? Because I'm leaving the federal government, and people, as you know, people always say that, and they don't just say it, it's a fact that the benefits and the working environment of the federal government are very, very good, right? It can be sometimes intense, but generally your work-life balance is pretty good. The pay is enough to be comfortable in most cases, and the benefits are top shelf. So I'm nervous about leaving that for a startup, but I took the risk for the reasons that I described earlier, and it paid off. As Daniel mentioned earlier, Care First ultimately acquired my company 7 years after we began operations, and I had, as I mentioned, equity in that company, and it paid off pretty handsomely.
You handcrafted that opportunity to be purchased out by a Fortune 100 organization, and there's not many people that I know personally that has done that. And so, again, that's very impressive, Chika.
Thank you. It was a lot of work, man. It was intense, and there were times when, and if you guys ever run into anyone else that worked at Trusted, there were times when we didn't think that we keep the lights on and the ship above water, but we did it. It was a lot of work, but it was fun work and rewarding work, both professionally and, as I discussed, financially.
Yeah. Well, I hope our listeners got a lot of value out of this discussion. We certainly did, and appreciate you stopping by and speaking with us today.
Man. Listen, this was great. I've sat on panels, lots of panels. I don't think I've ever. Well, no, that's not true. I've been interviewed like twice, but not something professional cool like this. I got interviewed one time in college. I love March Madness, right? And so 1 year in college, well, every year I would skip class and go to. That first Thursday and Friday of the games, I would just not go to class. I would just go to a bar with my friends and we just watch basketball. And so my very first interview was a reporter was doing a story on how much college kids love March Madness, and she interviewed me on camera that my professor, whose class I was supposed to be at, saw. So that was my very first interview, and I think I did one more for like a magazine article, but I've never like just sat down like this and had questions be posed and answer them. And this was a great, listen, I know that this podcast will be a raging success. So my only request is this, is that when you guys get to the mountaintop, you don't forget us little people down here, and you invite me back to do another one day.
Oh man, we love having you, man. And we'll keep and again, it's the power of the network. We love having you in our network too, man. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you.